First of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for you and Lori coordinating this in the background, and also thank you all for being change managers. I mean, in a time where people are still just grappling with understanding change in the world, and then you are helping to manage that change inside of organizations. You're already some of my favorite people, and I appreciate the participation already that y'all have been sharing. So as we have this conversation around designing a crisis-proof company culture with DEI, part of the reason we use the word designing in there is because your company culture is either happening by default or by design. So even as we start here at the very top, and a culture that's by default is generally one that's of inequity, one where we let the status quo, especially the status quo in the world, determine how we operate inside of our organization. However, one by design is more intentional. And in a time where things have got so intense, we have to be more intentional, especially with how we go about making change. So just at the top here, which one would you prefer, culture by default or culture by design? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Culture by default or culture by design? You can put design or default. All right, cool. I want to make sure I want the right people here, because as we go about designing this crisis-proof company culture with DEI, we also want to help to integrate change management practices and help y'all navigate these change management in a more diverse arena as we're stepping into the great beyond, even going back to what people are calling the new normal or the new abnormal, right? We have so many more changes than most of us were prepared to manage in our career. And here we go, already signed up for the journey. Now we have to be more intentional with how we navigate that. And we want to ensure that our organizations are fair and forward thinking as we create that unshakable culture of trust. You know, you're going to hear it called culture of trust, crisis-proof culture, culture of equity. From our perspective, all these things are synonymous. So when you see it in the slides come up in different ways, they layer on top of each other, and I'll be explaining that layering to make sure you walk away with, regardless of what you call it, how do we increase trust in your organization and make sure that there's equity for people to work safely and thrive? So that being said, I'll share the objectives to make sure you can learn to measure trust in your company culture so you can advance equity without offending people or making it worse, right? I think a lot of us want to make positive change, but we're afraid of making things worse. We want to help you to really make sure you're being intentional and you're thinking about it in a holistic way, as well as help to flip the script on privilege. Beyond, in this conversation of diversity, equity, inclusion, privilege has become a bad word. So we want to help you flip the script on privilege so you and your team can leverage your time, talents, and treasures to create the right solutions at the right time. And finally, engage more of your team in DEI as a positive experience, right? And you're going to keep hearing me say that because DEI has been so trenched with frustration and tension. We want to make sure it's a positive experience so you can have the low burden, high impact skills you need to help reach your goals. So with that, I'll say that FEAR's advantage means fuel equitable actions, relationships, and systems. We're all about taking the things that people have discarded or have said, for example, our fears. People have a lot of different ways of managing their fears. A lot of times I feel like we're kind of pushing them down or we're avoiding them. We're saying instead of avoiding them, what if we embrace them and actually use them to fuel us forward, specifically use it to fuel equitable actions, relationships, and systems? Because the alternative of running away from our fears, I really want y'all to tell me what's a problem you can solve by running away from it? What's a change you can manage by running away from it? We haven't found that. We've been asking people in every single one of our presentations. So from our perspective, turns out if you embrace change instead of clinging to the past, you get a say in what the future looks like. You even can bring the best parts of the past along with you. This is important. And when we're talking about change management, and I love some of the language coming out of ProSci, so I will reference it. This is not ProSci training, but I will share some of the things that really stood out to me. They talk about that future state that many of us as leaders are trying to take our team, and as leaders living in the future state, we have our team members who are still in the present state or the current state. And what's interesting, if we're trying to go to the future, clinging to the past, it doesn't even make sense. We're basically hitting the gas and the brake at the exact same time. And besides burning our tires, we can then burn out our team and burn ourselves out. So as we're going towards the future, it's important, how do we help people let go of the parts of the past, especially when holding on to the past also meant holding on to trauma, holding on to inequity, holding on to things like racism that our whole country is trying to navigate right now. And these things are showing up in the workplace, which is why I mentioned them. So as was mentioned earlier in the bio, we're on this mission to help 5 million leaders advance equity by 2030, to really create environments where employees can work safely and thrive, so we can create a world where more people can live safely and thrive. And my background is Haitian. I'm Haitian. And so even when I'm seeing what's happening in Haiti and thinking that we're not going to be able to solve all the world's problems, even when we as human beings are not hurting each other, there's still worldwide events and situations that happen. As we create more systems and structures to support each other, we can navigate the change together. Do me a favor, type the word together in the chat if you'd like to navigate more of these difficulties together versus apart. And with this division, we got to unsubscribe from the divide that we continue to perpetuate in our world. So from that perspective, our goal, whenever we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, we want to make it approachable, actionable, profitable, and even enjoyable, right? If change is already uncomfortable, we have to help to navigate it in a more enjoyable way for more people to embrace it. So we collaborate with practitioners like yourselves, as well as different platforms that you'll hear about, to help ensure that we can help deliver on the 5 ROIs of DEI. And I'll make sure I explain that before we get to the end of the presentation. So as we dive into this presentation today to focus on creating that crisis-proof company culture, we will focus on fuel, equitable, and actions for our time together. So my goal is to keep this brief as well as to keep it engaging. So there will be times where I stop at the sections and ask for volunteers if anyone wants to share on the mic, or you can continue sharing in the chat like you're doing. Thank you so much. So with that being said, when we focus on fuel, especially when it comes to change, we're telling all leaders that you're either fueling fires or forward progress. And people are trying to make change all the time. We're like, listen, you're either fueling fires or forward progress. Let's break this down. So right now, when we're asking people about diversity, equity, inclusion, asking what's their vision of DEI in their firm, in their organization, what's interesting, some people will tell us great things. They want to have more enjoyable Zoom calls. They have more diverse teams. They say we're going to go back to the office and people are going to love work. Or there's just going to be times where meetings go well. And when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, people actually have an enjoyable time. Whatever the vision is fine with us. And people start casting bigger and bigger visions. And I love looking at the work of Dr. King. He said he had a dream. And many people are still, like, I definitely found an example of this living dream here. However, when we talk to these folks about their vision or their dream for DEI, I'll start to ask them, what's the difference between a dream and a lie? And the short answer to that, the difference is the intentions and the actions that we take to make the dreams come true. When we have a vision, a compelling vision of DEI, and we take actions to make it come true, even if we don't get there, people can see the authenticity behind it. So when we're talking about building trust, one of the biggest things that is happening right now is a lot of folks have made claims about DEI, have made commitments publicly, even attached money to it, and then didn't do anything. We're still not doing anything about it. And meanwhile, we're change makers like, hey, you hired me to do this. You hired me to make sure that we can navigate these changes, but then we're not really even getting the tools to do it. So I want to be able to provide you with tools so we can use, depending that these tools can be useful regardless of your status in the organization, because we know that sometimes as practitioners, we're in the middle of the leadership and the employees and really trying to help everybody go in the right or in the same direction. So as we talk about the vision for DEI, we also have to look at some of our approach to DEI has been very surface level. Many people now are talking about race. Many people now are talking about race. And if anybody tries to talk to me about race, I want to be like, what part of race do you want to talk about? Because there's so many layers, but race is still only one way that we identify, one way that we show up in the world. So when we start to add other layers like ethnicity, culture, our mental or physical ability, our age, our sex, our sexual orientation, and then our gender expression or gender identity, we start to look at these as ways that people identify in the world and in the workplace. And all of these identifying factors will impact our leadership, right? So then we start to add other life factors, career factors, and then life experiences, including traumas and what we've experienced in our family or haven't experienced in our family. This is the best we could do to encapsulate intersectionality. This comes from United Way of Asheville, and saying that every single one of the people in your organization is a combination of these factors. Go ahead and type in the chat, how many people are in your organization? How many people are in your organization? We're working in one organization that has 300 people. So you think about how many folks are in this. So someone says 3,000, okay, right? Every single person we're interacting with is a combination of this. So When we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and creating a culture that can be crisis proof, it's really creating a culture of equity as a systematic effort to advance people of all diversities in your organization. I grew up here in Miami, Florida. And the interesting thing is there's so many diverse groups that oftentimes when we would be working to help one group, there's another group that raises their hand and say, hey, what about me? And that's happening over and over and again in the workplace. We start to create this tension and this friction. And what some organizations have been doing is saying, okay, we need to hire more diverse folks. And we ask, okay, what gets in the way? And they'll tell us lots of things. But I'll tell you, when we really understand what gets in the way, it's mistrust. Mistrust can be the most expensive problem a company has, but it's hard to quantify because most people don't put on paper, oh, I don't trust you. But it shows up in our behaviors and our actions, including how they go about navigating diversity, equity, inclusion. A lot of folks are pursuing visual diversity. So you're just meeting me for the first time. And when you meet me for the first time, the couple of things you can tell about me are my race. We're going to say the race is human race, by the way, right? We're just going to go and lump us all together here. So we're going to say race, appearance, and then you can tell a little bit about my body language. So this is visual diversity. People are hiring for visual diversity right now. And they're going nuts trying to say, how do we bring more Black people into our company? And like, okay, first of all, when you're asking things like that, that starts to create more tension of, are you trying to hire top talent? Or are you trying to hire top diverse talent? Because folks who have those kind of choices now are saying, well, if I don't trust the company, why should I be a part of it? Because even beyond what you can see here, when we start to talk, then maybe you get a couple more. Then maybe you get a couple more of understanding a little bit more about me and my communication style. But the rest we start to fill in as bias. The rest some people are not even able to bring to work. So as we start talking about mistrust, the more we can bring of ourselves to the workplace, the more likely we are to trust the workplace and trust our team. The more that we have to hide, or the more that is going to be written off, the less likely we are to trust our team, to hire our mistrusted. And so it's interesting how this brings in, I love this next piece. So Debbie hasn't seen this yet either. Got a quick little sneak peek there. So as we've been talking about change management and really honoring the work that ProSite does, so ProSite talks about these 10 aspects of a job, right, of an employee's job. So we have things from processes, systems, tools, job roles, critical behaviors, mindset, attitude, reporting structure, performance review, compensation, and location. And so anytime these things are changing, we have to invite change management to make sure employees can have this conversation and move it forward. Now, what's interesting is that human being, that representation, from our perspective, we would replace it with that diagram and say that this is intersectionality navigating with change, that a given person has all of these different factors at play. And when we have this in harmony, when you can bring more of yourself to the workplace, then the changes that we're navigating are not as difficult to navigate together because we're able to bring our full selves, and we're being given information, we're being navigated through change in culturally appropriate ways. Oftentimes what's happening now is people are just giving one format of information as opposed to multi-formats of what that could look like. For example, if I'm just talking to you this whole time, even if I'm engaging, like, oh man, this is kind of boring. I'm throwing visuals at you. We got music coming on. This is a multi-format or multi-sensory experience to give you information in a multi-format way to guide you through change. But a lot of organizations are not doing that. Just written documents, or maybe an email that if you miss it, you miss it. The change is rolling beyond it. So as we start talking more about this, and we're saying this would be ideal for a one kind of snapshot of what can be a crisis-proof culture, where you have a whole human being, a person who's feeling honored, who's feeling safe, who's feeling seen in their organization, and they have their 10 tasks, or they have these 10 job aspects, and they have a voice in these 10 job aspects, so that way they can create a pathway towards thriving. What generally happens, though, is when people are stripped down of this, and we have to do things like code switching, which is us literally having to change who we are based on who's in the room and what rooms we're even in, we start to see that the more we're focused on that, the less we can even be focused on our jobs. And as I'm looking at all the cameras here, I want to point out that something Dr. Michelle Borba talks about is called the empathy gap. It says as anxiety increases, our empathy decreases. So just, you can either put in the chat, you can put the word up, or if you're on camera, you can point up, Has your anxiety gone up or down this year? Up or down? Mine sure has gone up. You'll say up for sure. So with Dr. Michelle Borba's research saying that as anxiety increases, our empathy decreases. So the thing that we would need to actually navigate and build trust is empathy and those relational pieces. So the more those things start to break down, we're thinking about the outside world at work, and then we're not able to talk about those things. So we then have to hide what's happening, hide the things that are difficult for us, and we can't even ask for help. And this is how we keep fueling fires instead of forward progress. Now, as we dive into what this diagram could look like, instead of talking about the elephant in the room, we generally talk about the bomb in the room. Saying that when we are afraid of something blowing up in our face, we would call that a bomb. And from our perspective in DEI, problems usually happen in 5 areas: people, and then notice how the people has a 5, right? We start with people because people start organizations, right? People, I think ProSci says that change management is the people side of change. Well, absolutely. And we say that DEI is the people side of success because organizations are built to succeed. People work to thrive. So they have to also thrive at work in order to keep on working, right? Otherwise, we go through work and we're like, oh crap, I can't wait for Friday, or I can't wait till this is over. And we still have this like mentality that we're only given our bare minimum to just get through it. And this is how we start to create these other problem areas. So people problems, process problems, policy problems, production problems, and then profit problems. So we know mistrust both starts these chain reactions and keeps these chain reactions going. But the interesting piece here as we look at those 10 job aspects laid across this chain here. Now imagine you have these fires in your organization. You have this chain reaction where you come into work and you're supposed to have critical behaviors and your mindset's supposed to be on point, but you can't even get that settled because of what's happening in the world, or because you're afraid somebody someone's going to be prejudiced towards you, or implicit bias inside your organization is going to prevent you from succeeding. So then start thinking about the processes. Who do you actually talk to? Who do you avoid? The amount of times that people work around each other just to avoid having conversations is insane to me. That and not even insane, it's really adaptive, right? That we adapt when something goes wrong, we adapt to work around it, but we're not really addressing the issues. And you can see how the chain continues, and it's going to affect our processes. It's going to affect everything going down to the profit area. And profit shows up for us in 2 ways. One, on the individual level, that most of us, if we cannot see ourselves making a profit, like making a proper income in an organization, we start investing our time elsewhere to find a better job, find a better opportunity. So it's interesting if you think about the 10 job aspects. We say the more of those that change, the more saturated somebody is in change, or the more resistant they will be to change. However, there are people who are willing to jump ship and go to a complete other organization. That means all 10 of those things may change because they rather have a culture of equity. People are not leaving companies, they're leaving cultures, they're leaving managers, they're leaving the status quo. So it's important that we want to retain folks and we really want to build that team. We have to be building that trust and building the equity inside of our organization. Type equity if you're with me right now, right? If you're getting fired up like me too, type equity in the chat. And so even though we communicate in this chain reaction, it really happens more in a cyclical process. As we talk about a culture of inequity, essentially people are trying to pass the bomb around, pass the blame around. People are literally trying to delegate DEI to HR and say HR is going to take care of it. So no, this goes way beyond HR. Every single one of us in the organization is impacting how safe people feel around us, how included people feel around us, how much they trust us. Each and every one of us is impacting this. It means each and every one of us is responsible for putting out these fires. And we might have different levels of influence in that for sure. That's why I want to focus your attention on where we have influence. I'm absolutely with you. I just want this is the kind of same talk we get to everybody, that you can't delegate or opt out of DEI. If you do, then you are part of fueling more fires versus fueling forward progress. And as we're having these conversations, it's important that we're still asking that question of what gets in the way. And again, the simplest version we'll call it is mistrust. And we'll pause it here because we're going to circle back, because I want to be able to show you how you can start to create trust and build trust. But we also have to talk about how we do the how. Right, how we do the how is just as important about the how that we're trying to do. Right? And the reason I say that is because A lot of times right now, folks are striving to aim to get more equity, but they're doing it in ways that crush equity for others. That's what I'm saying, the how for the how. We're all about pursuing equity. We want to do equity without stigma, equity without the violence and without the polarization. Otherwise, we're literally creating the same problem again. And this is not everybody shares this opinion in the DEI space, but that's at least how we like to approach our work, to make sure that we can answer this question, which is a valid question. When somebody asks us in the equitable portion, what's in it for me? If equity is about fairness, then this is a fair question. And not everybody's going to do it because they're altruistic. Yeah, we can make a business case, and that's going to get some folks to get in. Sometimes it has to get really personal for the individual, for them to ever want to do anything about DEI. So we know that folks are on the whole adoption spectrum, so to speak. And how do we get them to adopt change in a way that, knowing, like, even before we started talking about DEI, they already said there's innovators all the way to laggards. And that was already before we started talking DEI. How do we expect it to change so quickly all of a sudden? We don't expect that. This is why when we do our work, we call it micro progressions. How are we taking steps on a regular basis that allow people to stay in the accomplishment zone, stay in the zone where they're seeing change, they're seeing their influence make a difference, that starts to motivate them to actually have a better experience with DEI and actually see the progress in their organizations. So type progress if you want to be learning about micro progressions and how we take those steps. You can type progress in the chat here. And as people are typing progress with exclamation marks and everything, the reason that this becomes so important is because when we look at the human being, I love this question. Who decides when you're ready to embrace a change? Type in the chat. Who decides when you're ready to embrace a change? Let's see who's got it first. Yeah, people got the me, right? So we talk about what's in it for me is because I decide when I'm ready to embrace the change. Now, we can force change on you. Happens all day. Right? I can force an employee to sit down, shut up, and listen to me and do their work, but I cannot force anybody to trust me. I can't even force anybody to feel safe. You decide when you feel safe. You decide when you give trust. So we're talking about people paying attention, we're really like paying trust into an organization. And when that trust is lost or diminished, then you see so many more of these problems can persist. So from our perspective, we think about it as your experience, your voice, your choice, your trust. I know Debbie was just talking about story. We can add your story in there as well. It's all can be in there. And especially when we look at change management, and part of it is managing resistance. If we want to break down trust in this way, you can think about, I love acronyms, as you can probably tell, that trust is our ability to transform resistance into understanding, safety, and thriving. This is especially important in a time where folks do not trust each other based on the perception that some group has implicit bias towards one another, or that one group is racist, or one group has had prejudice, or one group has privilege because the other one doesn't. We really have to be intentional about how we're managing that resistance and create understanding between you and the person, to be able to make sure they can feel safe, that you can feel safe in their presence, and that y'all can thrive together inside your organization. Notice this is all inside of an organization. And for the people who are signed up for the journey, it's worthwhile investing that time. And so part of what we promised as one of the objectives is to reframe this conversation around privilege. I want you to think about the blocks in red and which ones you identify with, or which one can you actually identify. We got white people, boys/men, cisgender people, wealthy upper middle class, homeowners, heterosexual or straight, adults 18 to 65, native English speaker, Christians, people without disabilities. How many of these, put a number in the chat, how many of these groups in red do you resonate with or do you identify with? Just put the groups in red. A total of 9. So far I've seen the highest is 8. Okay. So we got the highest is 8 and the lowest I see is 3. Okay. So what about the groups in white? So it says people of color, women/girls, transgender, gender nonconforming, financially poor or working class, LGBTQIA+. We have youth, either age 1 through 17, or adults 65 and older, We have non-native English speakers, non-Christians, and people with disabilities. How many of the groups? So I think it began, I think I'm seeing 5, maybe is the highest. Oh, someone says 10, got 10, 2. Okay. 1, how am I ally for 1? So now people are qualifying. So great. And we're seeing lots of things happening in chat. Now, this is generally how privilege is discussed in America, saying that the groups in red are oppressing the groups in white in order to maintain their privilege. Yeah. This is how generally the conversation goes. And then people are feeling sad like some of y'all are. And then people fade to black and say, okay, good luck with change management and we'll talk to you later. However, this is just one portion of the conversation. So this is, if we stopped here, we'd just be talking about marginalized groups. We'd just be talking about inequity and seeing how it shows up. And now some people are just now waking up to this conversation altogether, that we can talk about unfair standards, intimidation, threats, misrepresentation, economic abuse, where people are just now understanding that this is privilege as inequity. However, when we are wanting to go beyond this, we look at it like this, say, okay, if we can use our privilege to hurt other people, what if we can also use our privilege to help? What if, in fact, we need privilege to be able to leverage and be able to help more people? So from that perspective, we say, what if we focus our attention outwards and say, let's set equitable standards, help to increase power and protection, to diverse representation, to have economic access, to raise children, to be providing the honoring and granting status, increasing accessibility, to have systematic advancement. What if we focus our attention in this way and we actually start to use our privilege as equity, or our privilege to fuel equity, to be a part of that conversation? This is how we start to expand. Right? People are talking about getting more voices at the table. This is one version of what that could look like. How do we create those spaces where people don't have to conform, but we're making more space? And as we expand, we can create more space for others who are coming. When we talk about a crisis-proof company culture, we have to be thinking about people who are here and people who are coming. The diversity continues to expand so rapidly. Are we really prepared for the future? If not, we're going to continue having this conversation over and over and over again. And yes, change happens in a cyclical process. How are we building it so where it can be smoother and smoother as we go? So this would be a culture of equity, or we could also call this a crisis-proof culture, right? Imagine that you have more of your team members feeling like they're supporting each other. And notice how, if we look at the outside world kind of pushing in against us, if we're as a group pushing outwards, then we have each other's back. We're supporting one another as we go about doing the work we're doing. That is what many companies are catching the vision of. So this is in the US or in the world. Let's bring it into your workplace. I'm going to put some privileges on the screen. And once they're all on there, you can let me know how many of them you experience. So which of these privileges am I currently experiencing in my organization? I trust my team and they trust me. I have job stability. I feel physically, emotionally, and psychologically safe at work. My voice is included in decisions that directly impact me. People follow through on my requests/directives. I have the tools and support to do my best work every day. I have a salary that reflects my contributions to the company or the organization. I am in senior leadership position, or I have a pathway to senior leadership. I can make a lasting, meaningful difference through my role. So it's a total of 9 on there. Go ahead and put in chat. How many you got? So you got 9 is the highest I saw. 2, 5, 7, 8. So it's interesting. Even in this room right now, there's only a few of us who have all 9. And when we talk about privilege in the workplace, notice how this doesn't say anything about someone's skin color or their gender, how they present. It says this is what folks are looking for in the workplace as a sign that they belong, that they have voice, they have equity, they have trust. And so when we're talking about being able to measure some of these, thinking about what our team members, which of these privileges are our team members experiencing in our organization? And some of them are not experiencing this. So when we have this friction and we're trying to navigate folks through change and they do not have these sense of privileges inside the organization, they're not coming along the journey, or at least they're not coming by choice. Sometimes they're coming by force. And when we start to force things, we oftentimes will break trust as a result. So when we talk about starting to measure trust, And yes, we can break these apart into, say, for example, if you look at measuring trust by acting on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate strongly agree or from strongly disagree to strongly agree on a scale of 1 to 5? I trust my team. That could be one question. Then I believe my team trusts me. That could be another question. So we can start to break these apart into even an assessment. And we have a cultural equity assessment that we run with organizations before we do any kind of projects with them, because we need to know from multiple layers what is happening inside their organization and how are people of different backgrounds experiencing the organization. One organization that we're working with right now says we don't have a diversity, or at least one of the executives said we don't have a diversity problem. They have 300 people. And as soon as we start sorting their data by demographics like female, Hispanic, Black, they start to see the reds hit the heat map compared to the experience of the classic white male in the organization. It's not to say anything against white males, just saying they have only awareness of their experience in this organization. So just being able to show them their data has opened up a whole other conversation to make sure that things might be going well on the surface. Let's dig a little bit deeper and make sure that what's working well for you, we can increase for others. And what is being a barrier for folks, like some of y'all said you only have 2 of these, how do we give more of these privileges to people in our organization? So you're welcome to grab a screenshot of this. And I can pop myself in here so you remember who gave it to you, right? It could just look cool over here, but y'all can grab a screenshot. Yeah, great. I love the focus and attention. Is this helpful information out there? I'm seeing people focus, right? Yeah, thank you. That's why I get so fired up. So I'm going to finish out here. When we do an assessment or doing any kind of reach out for feedback, it's important that when we talk about increasing trust, just a simple equation here, that feedback minus action equals more mistrust. Whereas, really, if we want to help build trust, even in small ways, when we ask people for their feedback and we take action, that helps to increase trust. Now, the one thing that we hear after folks see this slide, like, oh, do I have to do everything somebody asks of me? No, but part of that action is also communicating what you will and won't do. So that way we can be in integrity with what we're actually doing in response to someone's feedback. The Workify says that when, I don't know if I have this slide, but Workify talks about the half-life of feedback. So when we do an assessment, for example, in an organization, after 90 days, the value of that feedback drops to only 60% valuable, meaning it loses 40% of its potency, 40% of its accuracy, 40% of what people were looking for that change to happen when they gave the feedback. So we're even encouraging folks to think about how we assess and how we act. You don't have to be perfect in your actions. Oftentimes imperfect actions and with that buffer of trust and communication makes such a bigger difference than trying to avoid making a mistake, which oftentimes means we avoid doing anything. So that will close us out on the equitable piece, because I know as we were talking about making change, we really have to be mindful of being equitable in that process. So one version for us as we get to this action portion for really framing DEI as a quest for diverse solutions. So when we have diversity of life experience, diversity of problem solving, we can come up with diverse solutions and really pinpointing equitable outcomes. So making sure the future states when we arrive, it is an equitable place for those who are in our company. And then we take inclusive actions to get there. So we can have diverse solutions, we can have equitable outcomes, but then still be taking exclusive actions or inequitable actions. And then we're still causing the same problems over and over again. So it's important that we have been sharing with folks, from our perspective, there is a difference between problem solving and problem solving with DEI or DEI problem solving. The normal version of problem solving is not as helpful anymore, because generally we're trying to do that fast. And we're working with teams that are high performing teams. They're saying, Kim, we need to go as fast as possible. I'm like, okay, the faster you go, the more you have to trust your team, your people, your vendors, your customers. There's a lot more that can go wrong when you go fast. So let's make sure we're doing DEI problem solving or bringing change management to this conversation and bringing change management with DEI so that people can come along on the journey. So no matter how fast we're going, people can not only keep up, but be helping to lead the pack in a way that's culturally appropriate for the diversifying cultures that are coming to our organizations. Now, we left off with everything on fire. So I want to be able to show how do we get to those 5 ROIs of DEI. So if we are taking an equitable approach of building trust, and what's interesting is as we have these conversations, we assess, when we take action, it's important that when we give people a chance to invest their individuality into our organization, then we get their involvement and we put out that people fire. So they can show up as themselves as individuals, and they can really invest their involvement, their engagement in our organization. When we give people an opportunity to invest their intelligence into our processes, and we get innovation, man, how many of us have to deal with processes that don't even make sense to us, and we could totally make a difference if we were given the power to make a decision? That's what we're saying. Give people the ability to be a part of the process sooner, so that way the change can have more innovation and can be more equitable for folks. And then we give folks a chance to invest their integrity into our policies, then we get the infrastructure. So this is both having the things written down, having the policies, but also having the trust and the practices that allow that to be part of your infrastructure. And then when we give people a chance to invest their leadership into our production, how do we serve our customers? Then we actually give them a chance to invest in their impact and the impact of our organization. And the beautiful thing here, when we give folks a chance to invest in their own income, in their own profit, we can put this bomb out all together because people have a greater vested interest in the success of the organization. And the part of this equation that we call infinite wealth, which you'll see as the 5th ROI, is a combination of customer lifetime value and employee lifetime value. Can you have one without the other? We're still trying to find that out, find a company who can have employee life or have customer lifetime value and treat their employees like crap. There was one organization that I went to just as a consumer, and it was so packed in there, and the folks felt understaffed. And they said the best way that you can make a change for us to make sure your experience is better next time is leave a negative Yelp review, leave a negative Google review. They were telling us as customers to bash the company so that way their bosses would actually listen to them and give them the additional support they've been asking for. I was like, wow, can you have customer lifetime value without employee lifetime value? I don't think so. So from our perspective, when we talk about bringing infinite wealth, is having both of those, because you are creating consumer equity as well as creating career equity for your employees. This is how you can get those 5 ROIs of DEI. Sorry, with the technology is blipping out a little bit for some reason. Maybe it's time to wrap it up. And so, because as we were talking about building trust, I want to leave y'all with this, which I'll put in the chat, which is a free PDF. This is 19 strategies you can use to build trusting relationships within your organization. And this is, again, we wanted to be able to provide tools that you can use at any level, knowing that we have a lot of different folks here. So you can go to fearsadvantage.com/trust. And I'll pop that link in the chat here, but I want to make sure y'all have it as we're starting to close out. And certainly want to say thank you for listening to this presentation. And as we transition into the Q&A, just in case you have to run, here is my contact info so you can stay in touch with me, because we have more than I can share in 1 hour training, but definitely, especially talking with practitioners, we're always wanting to be supportive of the work that you're doing, especially as you go about designing a crisis-proof company culture with DEI. So thank you so much. And let's go into the Q&A. Hello.
Hi. First, this has been awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm blinking out over here. Listening to this it's been humbling, and because you think about it from your own sense as a person. And I think a lot of times as change managers, we forget to do that because we're so worried about everybody else, but it's good to step back and see where we are as individuals. So I really appreciate that perspective. One of the big pieces, especially because I also manage internal communication. And so I'm thinking about, we are battling from a communication standpoint, from a change standpoint, the overload of information that goes to our employees from outside sources. We have the news outlets, social media, and all of the negativity that comes with those platforms. We battle that in our positions. And so I think just from the perspective of looking at each other as individuals and stepping back, I think this is such an amazing message. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. And I need, I got to talk to my boss about having you come and talk to our
Oh,
folks
nice.
about it,
Thanks.
because it's just really an important message that we miss out on. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I appreciate. And how is your name, Nichelle?
Nichelle, yeah.
Yeah, I like it. So thank you for sharing that on multiple pieces. This is part of the reason as with a change manager, like change managers, I wanted to give this as a gift. I mean, especially the work that we're doing is so intense, and we're oftentimes managing so many workloads, and then having people put additional requests on us that are like, what are you, how did you even come with this idea? But and then we figure out how to make it happen, a version of it anyhow. And so I'm glad that you're seeing the invitation to look at it for yourself as well, and understand what helps you to change and to navigate that, because so many people are depending on us as well. And I think on that same note, as you mentioned, with all the external communication we're receiving, um, it's one thing we were talking about as a team. Our co-founder Sarah talks about, how do we have conversations that might be off agenda, but they're still on topic, because so many of these topics are slamming into us right now that if we don't talk about them, but we don't speak out, we generally will act out. And we're seeing that happen when we say, hey, you can't talk about ... at work, fill in whatever blank you want. We're seeing that not only do people break that rule, but then they also show up in the behaviors that cause more conflict. So it's interesting to make the case for spending the time about how do we want to talk about these things at work, to make sure that we maintain the narrative. We talk about storytelling. Some of the researchers say that narrative beats facts, and it's like, it's crazy for those of us who actually like science and facts. Some people can come up with rumors and narratives that blow our mind, but if we continue to try to put the conversation elsewhere, and we're not necessarily having and holding and moving the conversation ourselves, we let these rumors or let misinformation continue to erode trust. And so thank you for bringing that up as a concern. And yeah, happy to show up and help with advocating for that conversation, especially, again, how we talk about it. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, nothing's coming through, but I still have a question.
Go for it. Yeah.
I've been involved in EDI for quite some time, and what really resonated with me is the what's in it for me. I struggle convincing people for many, many years. Any other advice you can give us? Because sometimes there's going to be a percentage that is going to be no what's in it for me. But what type of what's in it for me that I'm missing? I just haven't found it. I hate to sound pessimistic.
Well, I think that's part of the reason I started that portion also with who decides when you're ready to change. I mean, you might be saying all of the things, and it's about them. Part of the reason I pursued this path, many people don't know, but I when I was a kid, I was getting in trouble in school as early as third grade, being expelled out of my third grade class, and then being labeled as emotionally handicapped, put in alternative schools. And so now people see me with my master's degrees and like, Kimmy, you must have been a great student. I'm like, no. People are trying to force me quite a bit. People try to force me quite a bit to do what was nice and or be respectful. And it took time for me to start to find my own pathway into that. And so part of the reason I share that is talking about what people actually buy into, right? Sometimes people have to buy into our relationship with them, like that trust that we have. And because we ask them, they will do it, even if they don't really care about the thing. Sometimes it's buying into the information or the evidence that they're seeing in the world. Sometimes they have to start buying in after they've done the behavior enough times where like, oh, this is how it is. Oh, I'm starting to see the benefits, right? Some people use that example with going to the gym, for example. It's like a lot of people don't go to the gym, even though it's something that can be really helpful. But when some people start working out, they're like, oh, this is why I'm going to stay in momentum, because the behavior actually fuels the buy-in. And the other piece I believe people buy into is also having the space to say no and having their own consent to say no. Like right now, we're in a time where people are not allowing folks to say no. Hey, I don't want to have that conversation, or hey, I don't want to agree. We're kind of like you mentioned one version of convincing. It's like, I don't know if about you, but like when I see like a salesperson who's like really hard trying to convince me of something, like I am more likely to get like actually, the hair sticks up on my back. I would get like more firm about that. But I see myself as a salesman for hope and change. So how do I invite more people into the process and be able to help them see a version, whatever version they're open to, of something being able to change for the better? And sometimes that means breaking it down, then breaking it down again, and finding which part of, for example, diversity, equity, inclusion are they most receptive to, and using that as a building block to get them to the next phases if they are, if they're going to trust us to be their guide in that journey. So that was a lot to say. I don't think there's we literally, trust me, we sell DEI services. So we're trying to figure out every kind of in and out, how to handle every objection, and people figure out new ones. And look here, this is just how people adopt change in general, right? So if this is how it's been going down, even before a change that's really important to us, we have to keep in mind that diversity, equity, inclusion has only been around for about 20 years. So from our perspective, when we're talking about DEI, we're already pretty much only talking to innovators. We're still at a time, this is how we got to that number of 5 million businesses. There are 200 million businesses in the world. And so if we hit 2.5% of that, then we're hitting that 5 million mark. And so we're saying, great, that's our focus right now, because we already know there's folks who are not going to pick this up until it is mass and until everybody's doing it. So from that perspective, I would tell you to focus on the folks who are listening and making sure you create the best experience for them, because that is more likely to get folks to jump on the train moving forward.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't get to talk about all those things until people ask.
Well, anything else you've been burning to show us that you can jump?
There was one more thing, but I'll see if anybody else has a question before we do that.
Anybody else have a question? You can ask me directly if you don't want to say it aloud. I'm Lori Powell. She, her, hers.
Yeah, I appreciate the what's happening in chat. Thank y'all. And I'll make sure that if they didn't get it, that folks get this again. It looks like somebody unmuted, right?
Yeah, I have a question about, you talked about privilege as equity and using that to kind of bring everyone to that same place. One thing I'm always worried about is in trying to do that and trying to bring my energy to EDI stuff, making sure that I'm not overrunning anyone or taking up someone else's space or something like that. Any guidance on that?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ted. And one thing that we hear from our clients quite a bit is, am I the right one to be leading this conversation? And what I will share with them is let's reframe that to figure out which conversations am I the right one to lead. For example, Ted, there are some people, just based on who you are and your experience, how you look, that will hear a message from you differently than they will hear from me. It's important that we start to find those spaces that people will hear from us and that we can be of service in those spaces and the version of the conversation, because sometimes our presence and being there is also helpful. And then what you just said right there about taking up too much space, it's worth checking in. Because I can't give you one kind of version. There's times where I kind of take the back seat and I let folks step up, and we give, we bring in other, as I mentioned, we collaborate with other practitioners who want to give space for folks who their voice is more important in that space. However, my ability to be there and to be an ally or to be part of that conversation is also valuable, because people need to hear something from me in that same space, and just being mindful of what am I contributing, or what am I seeking to contribute, and what are the ways that I can give that? So I think that I would just have to be able to pose it back to you as a question, because if I were to give you one specific way, I think it would be really difficult in the landscape that continues to change, especially as different groups are impacted. Folks want to hear from very interesting intersections of like, hey, I want to hear from a Black CEO who's doing da da da. I was like, all right, man, you're making the room a lot smaller. But at the same time, there's people who are looking for what you can contribute, and it's finding those spaces where you feel comfortable sharing as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking. And it goes to everybody. I mean, again, there's because it's collective change, we need collective voices in a way that allows, like, kind of back to Lori's point, there's some people who they're not making a change, but if they hear it, you know, they say it takes us, I think the number keeps changing, but it's like 17 to 14 times to hear something before we actually act on it. It's like, maybe you're that 14th person they actually acted on. It's like, great. I'm one voice in the myriad of voices that you needed to hear to actually take action on that. Fantastic. I'm glad I could play my part.
Very good. Any other final words before we wrap up?
Focus on where you can leverage your influence to make the greatest impact. And that might be in smaller spaces right now, but equity here is a pathway to equity everywhere. So the skills you're practicing right here are going to serve you as you expand your sphere of influence and the people who are listening to you.
Very good. Well, thank you, Kemi. I can't thank you enough for your words of wisdom. Know that you always have a place to come back to talk to us. We'd love to have you again.